an overview of the German genocide. I prefer to use the term German genocide because if you say Holocaust, the brain immediately goes to what Jews call the Shoah, the fire. And we think about the over 6 million Jews that were killed in the Holocaust. But I think that because of that, I think it's easy to forget about the other groups that the Nazis targeted. And in many ways, it wasn't one genocide, it was about 5 genocides. Here's one of the more famous images. The anniversary comes up every May. Here is a book burning celebration, if you will, in the German genocide. One of the things that we've talked about as a mark of genocide is the need for the perpetrators to dumb down the civilian population or remove the intelligentsia class from the targeted populations. And literally, if you're burning books, you're probably not educating too much. As I said, the German genocides are broader than anti-Semitism. And we know this already. If you look at the famous imageries that have that disgusting taxonomy of human beings with the color coding, we're familiar with the yellow Star of David, but I think that given enough prodding or thought, we can remember that we've seen the pink triangles as well for homosexuals, and maybe even the orangish triangles for Polish people. But the German genocide targeted, yes, Jews, Roma, Poles, homosexuals, people with physical disabilities, people with mental disabilities. And all of this was outlined in this, again, disgusting chart there on the right, where you can see that it also does generations. So if it's you versus it's your parents versus it's your grandparents, and all of this is really related to the concept of what's called the blood quantum. The Holocaust, what we call the Holocaust, usually is indicative of the genocide against the Jews. Within Jewish culture, it's often called the Shoah, which means fire. It's the closest word in Hebrew to the word hell. And here, just like, this disturbs me so much. Like, here is this image. In that one oven, we believe almost 9,000 human beings were cremated. Look at that picture on the right, and I get some people will say it's a photo op, but how can you look at these pictures and deny the Holocaust? We have thousands, tens of thousands of pictures taken not just by British and American forces coming in from the West, but Russian forces coming in from the East. It's unfathomable to me that people deny the Holocaust. As you know, the term ghetto is an old European term for a Jewish neighborhood. Nowadays, in the United States, it means a bad neighborhood or a slum neighborhood, if you will. But the term originally means a Jewish neighborhood in Europe. We've heard of the Warsaw Ghetto because of the Great Warsaw Ghetto Rising. We might have heard of some of these other ghettos, but recently they have estimated, there's a new publication that came out about 5-6 years ago. It was also profiled in National Geographic, but we now estimate there were more than 42,000 camps and ghettos throughout Europe during the Nazi period. 42,000. We're not talking of just Dachau, Auschwitz, and Auschwitz II, right? We're talking 42,000 because each one of these ghettos and camps would have satellite camps. And there might be some of these camps identified in the 42,500 might just be a camp of 5 people. There might be a wood cutting camp that supports one of the other larger camps. But still, to be able to identify that many individual camps, and again, the fact that some people feel the need to deny the Holocaust. Here on the right is an image of people in the ghetto, and you can see the pajamas with the stripes, and you can see the triangles identifying human beings as if they're animals. One of the strategies that the Germans did, and it was kind of two-prong approach to these extermination and camps in particular, as well as the concentration camps, is most of them were not built in Germany. Theresienstadt is in the Czech Republic nowadays. Auschwitz is in Poland. What the Germans did is they built them on the eastern side, going into Poland in particular, because first of all, there was a higher Jewish population there. And remember, they definitely wanted to eliminate the Jewish population in Poland in order to seize that land, Lebensraum, whereas the original Jewish populations in Germany seem to be more being used as propaganda and then removed as inconveniences, but not completely with the goal of extermination at first. Remember, the Holocaust starts in 1933 with Kristallnacht, and World War II doesn't start till 1939, September 30th, with the invasion of Poland. So there are different motivations for the Nazi regime when they're targeting different Jewish populations in particular. So the concentration camps are built on the eastern side of Germany and into Poland, and the extermination camps are mostly in Poland. And the other reason for that is to keep it out of sight, of the German civilian population. And that's one of the reasons that for a long time, Germans that survived World War II would say, well, we didn't know what was going on. We were as blind as you are. That's challenged by a famous book by Daniel Goldhagen, I believe, which is called Hitler's Willing Executioners. I think it's 1995, great book. And he debunks the denial, the innocent denial, by saying, well, how could you be a baker or a butcher outside of one of these camps where one day your order is for 40,000 loaves of bread and the next day your order is for 10,000 loaves of bread? Where did those people go who were eating the other 30,000 loaves of bread, and so forth? Again, these ghettos and camps, they could be as large as the Warsaw Ghetto, 500,000 people, and they could be as small as a dozen prisoners at the and I'll try to pronounce this with my broken German, Munchen-Schwabing camp that was identified. And then in these camps, there were people who were the organizational leaders or medical staff, and I use that term, medical staff, in quotation marks, on the ground. And then there are, if you will, the office, the hierarchical people responsible for the genocide in Germany, in Berlin. So we have the angel of death, Dr. Mengele, who was able to escape prosecution. He escaped to Argentina and died, I believe, swimming, if I remember correctly. We have Sister Pia. We have Joseph Kramer, the butcher of Belslin. That's where Anne Frank died. We have Frankenstein, and we have the butcher of Warsaw. Okay, these are people who we know were actively partaking in the violence. On the right, we have, again, the hierarchical people who are responsible for the violence. And that becomes an interesting legal thing as well. And that's what was adjudicated in the Nuremberg trials. But you probably know Hitler and Himmler, maybe Goebbels, the propaganda minister. But then these were other people who were put on trial for the Holocaust in the great Nuremberg trials. And one of the most interesting cases is Albert Speer, who was the architect and munitions minister, and he spoke English. He was the only defendant, I believe, that spoke English during his trial, and he's good looking, charismatic, and he was the only one not to get a death sentence. He only died in the late 1980s, if not early 1990s, and there are several books in which he gave interviews about his role in the Holocaust. Fascinating stuff. Now, the hypocrisy, of course, of the Holocaust is that there are so many Nazis who are intermarried or of Jewish descent. You know, Goebbels' stepfather was Jewish. We think that Hitler himself might have been a quarter Jewish, and so forth. And the hypocrisy continues. I guess this is more irony than hypocrisy, but they had a photo. Let me try that one again. They had a photography campaign where they wanted to have the winning baby would be the most beautiful Aryan baby in all of the Third Reich. And the baby that won was a Jewish baby. Here's a picture of the winning photograph, as well as the surviving baby years later. And here's the quote from her mother: "I wanted to make the Nazis look ridiculous." Well done. Here's this theory that Hitler himself might have been a quarter Jewish. It has never been proven conclusively. They have done some DNA testing. As you may or may not know, Hitler's nephews lived in Long Island, New York during World War II. And so we have their DNA. And at that time period, we hadn't isolated DNA, but at that time period, we had intelligence officers interviewing Hitler's nephews in Long Island for intel, and years later we extracted DNA, and that was used to corroborate the fact that it was and is Adolf Hitler's skeleton and body that's in Moscow, that was removed after the fall of Berlin. But you know, these dehumanizing acts of violence, and I'm going to show you some more pictures. And this starts off a little slower. And I just want to, again, give fair warning to anybody who might be uncomfortable with pictures. There are some very disturbing pictures coming up, but here you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, literally cattle cars being used to transport human beings. Treblinka, which is one of the more famous concentration camps. We know that almost 1 million Jews were killed just in this one camp, and several thousand Roma. Now, one of the things that I want to be clear about is we don't want to fall into the trap of competitive victimization, but it is worth noting that because the Roma population was smaller to begin with, and the Germans went after the Roma population in particular, as well as the Polish and the Jewish populations. But the intensity of the persecution of the Roma is that per capita, the Roma were decimated at the greatest percent. At the end of World War II, they estimated there were only about 200,000 Roma left in the world. More war criminals. And here's the disgusting Dr. Mengele that I mentioned. He performed experiments on twins at Auschwitz, and he would cut people apart and then try to put them back together. Just absolutely dehumanizing, disgusting, and I want to say painful experimentation. The Nazis were well known for doing these medical experimentation with no what's the word I'm blanking on, but no pain killing medicines. And here's the picture on the right of the Dr. Death during the Nazi regime, and on the upper left-hand corner, it's a picture of him in Argentina prior to his death.
I actually almost did my presentation, or my not presentation, my topic proposal on that, because I am not only Jewish, but I'm also a twin.
I did not know you were a twin. But I like your topic as it is as well, the elimination of the Polish intelligentsia.
I too am a twin. Sorry, I'm just very off topic. Never mind.
Was there another voice?
Yeah, I'm a twin as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah, identical.
Wait, you and Jordan are twins? That's amazing.
Yeah, no.
I had no idea.
Different last names, but don't worry about that part.
Well,
Yeah.
You're in hiding like Luke and Leia. Duh, they were twins, different last names. Really? Are you paying attention at all? So if you have the time and the bandwidth, because it is disturbing, we do have survivor stories of Dr. Death's twins. Eva Kaur and Miriam Moses were twin sisters, and you can listen to their TED Talk and learn more about them by clicking on these links when I share them with you. And one of the other things in particular, in addition to experimenting on twins that the Nazis did, is they did a lot of work actually with eyes. And one of the more interesting ethical and legal issues at the end of World War II was when the Americans, the Brits, and the Russians went into these camps and found all of the data, the scientific experiments. What do you do with that? One argument is it was unethically and dehumanizingly taken from those Jewish victims, so you should destroy the data. And then the other argument is those people have died, and so if we can recoup and learn from their horrible deaths, that some small sliver of good can come out of their horrible deaths. And that is what they decided. Modern ophthalmology is based in many ways on Nazi experimentation. But I want to revisit this idea that you don't have to cut human twins. You don't have to do surgery on people's eyes. You don't have to kill for it to be a genocide. Genocide is about the dehumanizing process, the destruction of community. In particular, on the left, here's 1935. So 2 years after the Nuremberg laws, but the war has not begun. And here's a school picture where the Jewish students are forced to go to the front of the room and stand in front of their non-Jewish German classmates, where the board says, on the blackboard, the Jew is our greatest enemy, beware of the Jew. This is psychological torture. And it's also mob mentality. And I'm sure it would be not surprising that the students in that room who are being encouraged to taunt their Jewish classmates then later become members of the German army during the war. Picture on the right bothers me so much. The idea of taking away somebody's sexuality, their gender identity, that in Orthodox Jewish community, as well as other cultures around the world, the beard is the symbol of masculinity. And so to shave a man's beard right then and there is an act of like stripping them, robbing them of their sexuality. And the same thing is going on with women as well. I think the next picture, next slide, has a picture of a woman's hair being cut. Women's longer hair being a symbol of gender identity and sexuality and virility, fertility. But I always ask this question. I know there's not an answer, but like, why starve people if you're just going to kill them? Again, this psychological process of dehumanization, whether it is gluttonous and enjoyable on the part of the torturers, or whether it's almost necessary on the part of the torturers so that they can then kill. Is it part of that? Dehumanize them to the point where they're not human, and then I can psychologically deal with the murder and extermination. Picture in the bottom center is a really famous picture. This is actually a picture of Elie Wiesel's bunk, the great author who wrote Night. That's Elie Wiesel there himself. And one of the things that's interesting, both in terms of psychology and law, is the idea of intent. Whether the perpetrator of a crime knows that what they did is wrong. Think about a little kid, a toddler, hiding behind the couch because he knows he pooped his pants or he knows he made a mess, right? That when you try to hide your crime or your misdeed, it's an indication that you knew or know what you did was wrong. Here at one of the concentration camps, when the Allies got to the camp, they found the bodies covered with lime. Lime is an accelerant for decomposition. They were trying to hide the bodies. They knew what they were doing was wrong. This is probably one of the most famous pictures. This comes out of the Russian archives. So we have not just the starvation, but the nakedness. Small piece of good news. There's what's known as the Great Escape from Sobibor, that some Jewish prisoners of Sobibor were able to escape. Unfortunately, because of their escape, those that didn't escape were decimated. I don't know if you're aware of the term decimated is a Latin term that means to kill 1 out of every 10 people, as in deca or December, decimate. So there were retributions on the people who did not escape from Sobibor, but it is important to know that people were trying to escape. Some people did escape. And the most famous concentration camp is probably Auschwitz II. And here's the entrance, the gate to Auschwitz II. Here's the train tracks that those cattle cars would have brought Jewish people from all over Europe to die. Ironically, the famous gate over Auschwitz II says, "Working will make you free." The picture on the bottom right-hand corner, it's hard to remember, but the guards at these Nazi camps, they had their families with them. They had their wives, they had their children. They woke up in the morning and they kissed their wife on the cheek and they patted their little kids on the head and said, "Study hard, be nice to your teachers, listen to your mom." And then they went and they murdered. First, they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I wasn't a Jew. And then they came for the communists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a communist. And then they came for trade unionists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a trade unionist. And then they came for me, and by then there was no one left to speak for me. And that's just one of the genocides, right? That's a very quick overview of the Holocaust, of the Shoah. But as I mentioned, the Roma, which is despairingly, we use the term gypsies, they have their own genocide, which they call the devouring. Targeted because they're different, darker skin, different cultural attributes in terms of clothing and music. Here's the picture I mentioned before, bottom left-hand corner, cutting women's hair to take their sexuality away from them. Another genocide, the Poles, the ethnic Poles, predominantly Catholic, who were murdered because of Lebensraum. Germany wanted their land. And there's always, again, that stage of genocide where you go and you get rid of the intelligentsia, going after the teachers, going after the officers, going after the politicians, going after leaders in the Catholic Church who were speaking out against what was happening to the Jews. And so here on the left is the taxonomy, the classification of Polish Catholics. And the picture on the right is an image of the taxonomy of Polish Jews. And unfortunately, there's a significant amount of competitive victimization between these two communities even today. And then there's the usage of slave labor as an aspect of genocide as well, right? You don't have to kill people for it to be genocide. You can do forced migration. You can remove children from their family, and you can use things like forced labor as well. One of the most inspiring stories out of the German genocides is the story of Maximilian Kolbe. I don't know if you're familiar with this. He was a Catholic priest who was in one of the camps. And when they were about to kill some of the Jewish prisoners, he said, "Stop, take me, kill me." And the German soldiers thought it was so funny that they did take him, and they put him in a prison and starved him a little bit, tortured him a little bit, and then murdered him. But the other side, like I said, is the competitive victimization. The idea that Polish Catholics and Polish Jews are in competition for attention, if you will, about what happened to their populations, this idea of tribalism. Similar, we have Holodomor in Ukraine, where the Soviets, the Russian Soviets, starved and murdered Ukrainian Catholics, and then the Nazis killed Ukrainian Jews. And even today in 2021, the Ukrainian Jews and the Ukrainian Catholics and Orthodox Christians are in competition for attention for what happened to their people. Instead of embracing in solidarity, look at this horror that happened to all of us. So here's a picture of a cross, a Christian symbol, obviously, that was put up on one of the spots, I believe it's Barrack 13, that was used during the Holocaust to kill Catholics and Jews. And it was not well received by the Polish Jewish surviving populations. Primarily in Israel, I would say that populations of Jews in Poland is very small today. But there's another genocide. There's the German genocide against homosexual people within not just Germany, but the whole Nazi Empire. And the irony is that there are some researchers who think that some of the people that were behind the targeting of gay people in Europe during the Nazi Holocausts were gay themselves. It's similar to, like I said, about the idea that some of the Germans that were perpetrating the Holocaust against Jewish people were Jewish themselves. So Ernst Röhm was part of the brown shirts, the SA that were used by Hitler before the Night of the Long Knives, when he replaced the brown shirts with the black shirts, replacing the SA with the more famous now, the SS. And that's when Ernst Röhm was removed from his high position within the Nazi regime. The legal justification for attacking homosexuals in the Nazi regime is called paragraph 175. It's well worth doing some research on paragraph 175 on your own to learn more. Here is Ernst Röhm with Adolf Hitler. This is the man that was in charge of, literally the office was called the Reich Central Office for Combating Homosexuality and Abortion. And like so many other people being targeted by the German Nazi regime, extermination through work, working people to death, slave labor, medical experimentation, and so forth. And there's more. The Nazis went after people with physical and mental special needs as well. They have this law that comes out very early, 1933, the law for the prevention for the progeny with hereditary diseases, that there's a sterilization program to sterilize people who have diseases like schizophrenia, manic depression, congenital feebleness, what we would call mental deficiency today, physical deformities, epilepsy, blindness, deafness, alcoholism, and even diabetes. As a type 1 diabetic, I could have been sterilized or killed by the Nazis because they want to eliminate the genes that cause type 1 diabetes. The program here was called T4. So again, the laws that go after the Jews are called the Nuremberg laws. The laws that go after homosexuals is known as paragraph 175. And here we have the T4 program. And the T4 program was run out of hospitals. And within these hospitals, they had specially constructed gas chambers within their own hospitals. So the gas chambers were not just used to murder people within the extermination camps, but even in hospitals. Forget the Hippocratic oath of to do no harm. But we don't know how many people really were murdered because these were done indoors, and because of the crematoria, it's harder to know. It's possible that Hitler's own family was targeted in the T4 program. We know that depression was prevalent in Hitler's family tree. So it's possible that the Nazis went after Jews and Hitler was possibly part Jewish, and the Nazis went after people with depression and Hitler had depression in his family tree. So it's just mind-boggling, this horror that we call the Holocaust. Here are some children with Down syndrome murdered by the Nazis. Here's a propaganda poster justifying the murder of people who are different. This is one of those euthanasia castle hospitals where we know people were killed. There's the gas chamber on the right. So these doctors were put on trial as well. It's not as famous as the Nuremberg trials. The second round of trials were known as the doctor's trial, but we being the West and the Russians allies, we put the doctors that performed these horrific acts on trial, and here's one of them. And they were not apologetic. And neither were the leaders of the Nazi regime that were put on trial in the more famous Nuremberg trial. The only one that showed remorse was, again, the charismatic, English-speaking Albert Speer. And he was the only one not given a death sentence. Here is the more famous Nuremberg trial. This is a colorized photo, which just, when we see pictures from World War II colorized, it just adds a whole nother layer to the horror, in my opinion. This is Goering. Goering survived the execution. And what I mean by that is he committed suicide just before he was going to be executed. The chief executor for the Nuremberg trials was an American from Texas named John C. Woods. That's pictures of the Nazi executor. Time magazine credited, interesting word choice, Woods with more than 300 executions as a result of the Nuremberg and Doctor trials. Here is Goering, who I just said survived his execution by committing suicide. The Nazis often had false teeth filled with cyanide, or had cyanide tablets hidden within their clothing, often within their watches. As the story goes that was told to me was that Goering offered one of his guards his watch, which was in the prisoner's locker, and said, if you give me my watch for a moment, you can have it. And that he retracted the pill, committed suicide, and the watch allegedly disappeared. That story was told to me by John Dalibwai, who was one of the intelligence officers that interrogated the Nazis at the Nuremberg trials. I got to meet him when I was at Miami University of Ohio and hear him speak multiple times and interview him for my research as well. So one of the factors in terms of prosecuting the Nazis was this tension in international law that from Westphalia up to World War II, the idea was that his rule, his religion, and that was this idea that any ruler could do whatever they want within their own country, and that a country had the right to territorial integrity, that you can't go into somebody else's country. Now, coming out of the late 19th century and in World War I, we also have this rising idea of nationalism and self-determination, that each individual demographic group has the right to have their own nation state and has the right to freedoms. So we see this tension between ethnic and demographic groups of other sorts wanting their own countries and countries saying, leave us alone. We have the right to do what we want within our own country, and we have the right to protect our borders. This is all going on, and these quotes are from World War I, but that plays forward into the Nuremberg trials, because the question becomes, can the Allies prosecute the Nazis? Because what the Nazis did in many cases was within their own country to their own people. But they did also invade other countries, which was the opening of a door in terms of international law, which we use today. And so we did put them on trial for the victims, for the Jews, for the Roma gypsies, for the homosexuals, for the mentally and physically challenged. We have a consequence, unlike we have with Armenia. We know who the perpetrators were at the organizational level, Himmler and Hitler, and on the ground level as well. So that's my little lecture for today.